Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the History AI podcast. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. And today, we are riding into one of the most fascinating stories of the American West, the life of Quanah Parker, the last Comanche chief, and honestly, a guy who might have been able to outsmart both cowboys and Congress.
Right? Quanah Parker's story is like something out of a movie, except it's all real. He was born between worlds, became a war leader, resisted U.S. expansion, and then turned around and became a statesman, rancher, and even a guest at Teddy Roosevelt's White House dinners.
Talk about a character arc. From resisting the U.S. Army to rolling up to D.C. in full regalia like, hey, pass the gravy, Mr. President.
Stick around, folks, because we're diving into the life, legacy, and legend of one of the most dynamic figures of the 19th century, Quanah Parker. Alright, let's set the stage. Quanah Parker was born around 1845, during a time of incredible turmoil and cultural collision in the American Southwest.
His mother was Cynthia Ann Parker, a white settler kidnapped as a child in 1836 during a Comanche raid on Fort Parker in Texas. She was raised by the Comanche and fully assimilated into the tribe.
Right. Cynthia Ann married a Comanche warrior, Peacemaker, and their son was Quanah. So here's the thing, Quanah was ethnically half European American, but culturally 100% Comanche. He didn't even speak English as a child.
And he wouldn't meet his white relatives, or even learn about his mother's origins, until much later. Growing up, he was trained as a Comanche warrior, and by his teens, he was already participating in raids.
Now let's pause here and remember, the Comanche were no joke. They were known as the Lords of the Southern Plains. Fierce, mobile, and expert horsemen. They basically controlled a massive swath of territory called the Comancheria.
And Quanah, even as a young man, was rising in the ranks. After his father died, he began to lead his own band. He wasn't just surviving, he was becoming a force. Okay, so by the 1870s, Quanah Parker had made a name for himself as one of the most skilled and determined Comanche leaders. But things were getting bleak. The U.S. government was done playing nice on the southern plains.
Right. The buffalo herds, the heart of Comanche life, were being slaughtered at industrial scale. We're talking millions of bison wiped out in just a few years. Not by native tribes, but by commercial hunters, often backed by railroad expansion and encouraged by government policy.
That wasn't an accident, by the way. General Philip Sheridan famously said, "Kill every buffalo you can. Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone." Brutal, but it shows how deeply connected buffalo were to resistance.
So when the bison disappeared, it wasn't just about food. It was about identity, economy, mobility, everything. And that's what set the stage for what became the Red River War of 1874-1875.
Let's talk about Adobe walls, because this is like Quanah Parker's most dramatic moment as a war leader. He teamed up with Issa Tai, a spiritual leader and self-declared prophet, who convinced several tribes they could defeat the white settlers with divine protection.
Which sounds great until you realize they attacked a fortified trading post in the Texas Panhandle, where the buffalo hunters had powerful rifles with a mile-long range.
Yeah, not exactly fair odds. Quanah led the charge, was shot in the side, but managed to escape. The assault failed, but it kicked off a full-scale military response from the U.S. Army.
The Red River War that followed was a coordinated campaign to drive the remaining native resistance off the plains. And this wasn't a single battle, it was a relentless campaign of attrition. The army destroyed villages, burned food stores, and captured horses.
And the Comanche Kiowa and other tribes were constantly on the move, trying to stay ahead. But by late 1874 and early 1875, the writing was on the wall.
Here's where Quanah made what I think is his boldest and most important decision. Instead of choosing annihilation, he chose to surrender, and not just quietly. He negotiated the terms himself.
He approached Colonel Mackenzie at Fort Sill and offered to lead his people onto the reservation in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, on one condition, that they be allowed to stay together as a band.
And Mackenzie, who respected Quanah as a fighter, agreed. That move basically spared hundreds of Comanche from starvation or death. And Quanah didn't stop there. He turned that surrender into a new kind of leadership.
He wasn't technically a chief, by Comanche tradition. But after the war, he was appointed by the U.S. as principal chief of the Comanche Nation, something that had never existed before. It was a kind of hybrid role, half tribal, half diplomatic.
And he crushed it. He learned English, wore tailored suits to meetings, but still honored Comanche traditions. He walked in both worlds better than almost anyone in Native history.
He worked to bring resources to his people, securing cattle, negotiating grazing leases, and pushing for better housing and education on the reservation. He even started sending Comanche kids to school, although, full disclosure, a lot of Comanche families were not fans of boarding schools, for good reason.
Right. Assimilation programs were often abusive. But Quanah saw education as a survival tool, not a surrender. He wanted the next generation to know how to navigate the white man's world without losing their roots.
And let's not forget, he became a widely successful rancher himself. He ranched thousands of acres, had a herd of cattle, and even rented grazing rights to Texas ranchers, pulling in a serious income.
By the early 1900s, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. And all of that happened after he'd been a war chief. That's one of the most remarkable transitions in American history. So after Quanah Parker made that incredible shift, from guerrilla war leader to reservation diplomat, you might think he'd just quietly fade into the background. But nope. This man leaned into the spotlight.
Big time. In fact, the late 19th and early 20th centuries saw Quanah rise to national prominence. He became a kind of cultural bridge between Native and white America, a living symbol of adaptation without total assimilation.
Let's paint the picture. Imagine Quanah Parker in full Comanche regalia, braided hair, eagle feathers, silver conchos, sitting across from senators in D.C., or dining with President Theodore Roosevelt at the White House.
True story. In 1905, Roosevelt invited him on a wolf hunt in Oklahoma. Quanah showed up in style, helped organize the hunt, and totally charmed the press. Roosevelt reportedly called him a great man, a true American.
And Quanah knew exactly what he was doing. He used those public appearances to advocate for his people, pushing for better reservation conditions, tribal sovereignty, and economic opportunity. He was part celebrity, part diplomat.
At the same time, he never stopped being a Comanche leader in the traditional sense. He kept multiple wives, which was common in Comanche culture, and maintained strong spiritual authority among his people.
And speaking of spirituality, we've got to talk about his role in the Native American Church. This was one of the most unique religious movements of the era, a blend of Christian teachings and indigenous practices, centered around the ceremonial use of peyote.
Yeah, peyote, the hallucinogenic cactus, was used in sacred rituals to induce visions, healing, and spiritual insight. Quanah was a huge supporter of the movement. His personal motto was, "The white man goes into his church and talks about Jesus. The Indian goes into his teepee and talks with Jesus."
That right there? That's the kind of synthesis he stood for. Not abandoning his culture, but finding ways to adapt and survive while preserving identity.
And there's another layer to his legacy, his mother, Cynthia Ann Parker. After being captured and raised by the Comanche, she was recaptured by Texas Rangers in 1860 and returned, against her will, to white society. She never readjusted, never stopped mourning her Comanche family.
It's one of the saddest parts of the story. She basically starved herself and died in grief. Quanah didn't even get to see her after her recapture. But years later, after becoming chief, he had her remains exhumed and reburied beside his own, near Fort Sill.
It was his way of honoring her life, her choice, and reclaiming a painful history. He even had a granite monument built with both of their names on it, Cynthia Ann and Quanah, together again.
Quanah Parker died in 1911, but by then, he'd cemented his place in American history, not just as the last war chief of the Comanche, but as a visionary leader who walked a razor's edge between tradition and change.
And his legacy lives on. He's in textbooks, documentaries, biographies. There's even a town named Quanah, Texas. Schools, highways, and monuments bear his name.
His descendants continue to speak out on Native rights and cultural preservation. And he remains a symbol, not just of the Comanche, but of the broader Native American experience in the face of colonization, displacement, and resilience.
What I love most is that Quanah didn't just survive history, he shaped it on his terms.
So, we've walked through the battles, the politics, the peyote, but let's get to the real question. Why does Quanah Parker's story still hit home today?
Because his life is basically a blueprint for navigating cultural upheaval. The dude was born at the absolute tipping point of native sovereignty and US expansion, and he didn't just get swept away. He learned to lead in both worlds.
And that's a theme we're still wrestling with, right? Identity, assimilation, resistance, representation, whether you're indigenous, an immigrant, or just someone trying to hold on to your culture in a changing world, Quanah's story has something to say.
Exactly. He didn't say, "We lost, I give up." He said, "Okay, the rules changed, so I'm going to master the new rules and still protect my people." That's leadership under pressure.
And think about this, he was never formally educated, didn't speak English until adulthood, and yet he became a diplomat, entrepreneur, religious figure, and political strategist. All self-taught. That's grit on another level.
And he wasn't a sellout, either. He wore traditional clothing, honored Comanche customs, and stayed deeply rooted in native spirituality. But he also knew when to sit down at the negotiation table, sometimes literally with the president.
Today, there's a real hunger for role models who don't fit the binary. Who aren't all fight or all conform. Quanah showed that you can resist and adapt. You can honor the past and face the future.
And when we talk about indigenous history, too often it's either tragedy or nostalgia. But Quanah's life gives us something else, complexity. He was a warrior, yes, but also a peace broker, a businessman, a father of 25 kids.
And the guy could rock a buffalo robe and a three-piece suit. That kind of duality? That's the real history, not clean, not simple, but deeply human.
So why should we care about Quanah Parker today? Because his life is a masterclass in leadership under pressure.
He didn't just fight, he evolved. He embraced diplomacy, leveraged relationships, and carved out a future for his people in a world that had turned upside down.
And his story reminds us that history isn't just about conflict, it's about survival, strategy, and identity.
Also, he just looked awesome. Seriously, Google him. That long hair, that intense stare, that mixture of tradition and swagger, it's iconic.
And here's one more thing, Quanah's story challenges the idea that native people are just part of the past. The Comanche nation is still here. His descendants are still here. Indigenous communities across North America are still writing the next chapter.
That's right. And if you're listening right now and you've never heard of Quanah Parker before this, now you have. Now he's part of your story too.
History is only forgotten when we stop telling it.
Alright folks, that's it for today's episode on Quanah Parker, the last Comanche chief. If you enjoyed the ride, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps this podcast grow.
And remember, all our episodes are evergreen, so whether you're binging today or listening a year from now, it's always a good time for a history deep dive.
Don't forget, you can suggest topics on our social media. Just search at the History AI Podcast. We love hearing from you.
And yes, we've got new merch. T-shirts, mugs, and more. Check the link in the show notes to grab yours.
Big thanks for riding with us today. From buffalo hunts to presidential dinners, Quanah Parker's story is a legend worth remembering.
Catch you next time on the History AI podcast. Stay curious, stay caffeinated, and keep asking the big questions.
Looking for the perfect way to show appreciation for the incredible mom in your life? Discover Exhausted Moms, a coloring journey to relaxation and humor, the coloring book that speaks directly to the heart of motherhood. Gift her an escape into pages of laughter, empowerment, and moments of tranquility. With Exhausted Moms, she'll find a blend of whimsical illustrations and inspiring quotes that celebrate her daily triumphs and challenges. Crafted with love from images I created for the mother of my children, each page offers a space for creativity and relaxation, a reminder that she's doing an amazing job, even on the toughest days. Give the gift of laughter, peace, and recognition. Exhausted Moms isn't just a coloring book, it's a hug, a nod of understanding, and a token of appreciation for everything she does. Surprise her with exhausted moms today and watch her face light up with joy. Because every mom deserves a moment to herself, wrapped in the colors of love and support.
Where the buffalo roam, a child of the wind, the dust his home. Mother of white, father of red, woven into worlds where footsteps